I should have never gone to the blood banquet. But when your best friend, the only vampire you've ever trusted with your life, insists that you belong there, that you're safe with him, that you matter, you believe him. I believed Calum Draven, and that belief almost destroyed me. My name is Alara Voss, and I'm human. Completely, utterly, fragile bones and beating heart human. In a world where vampires rule the night, where they own the cities, control the politics, and dictate who lives and who becomes their next meal, being human means you're prey, always prey, never equal. I learned that early. My parents taught me to keep my head down, avoid eye contact with the pale-skinned aristocrats who walked our streets after sunset, and never question their authority. Survival wasn't about pride, it was about staying invisible, and I was good at it. Until I met Calum. It was 3 years ago, late at night in the university library where I worked. I heard footsteps echoing through the ancient halls and turned to find him standing there, tall, with dark hair falling past his shoulders, eyes that shifted between silver and storm gray. He wore a long black coat that made him look like he'd stepped out of another century, which, knowing vampires, he probably had. He was beautiful in that terrifying way vampires always are, like a statue carved by someone who understood perfection but had forgotten warmth. He asked me about my research, and somehow we started talking. That night turned into weeks, then months, then years of late-night conversations about history, philosophy, even terrible jokes I'd make that would actually get him to laugh. Over 3 years, Calum became the only vampire I could trust. He never fed from me, never made me feel like food. With him, I felt seen, like more than just a fragile human. So when he showed up at my apartment that autumn evening with a blood-red envelope sealed with black wax, I didn't hesitate. He told me I was important to him, that he wanted me by his side at the blood banquet, the most important social event of the vampire calendar. When I protested that I was human and they would hate me, he promised I'd be treated as his guest. As his equal, that word, equal, echoed in my mind as I got dressed that evening. I chose a simple black dress, tied my hair back, and tried to calm the hurricane of nerves in my stomach. When Calum arrived to pick me up, he told me I looked beautiful, and I believed him. I shouldn't have. The nocturnal court's mansion sat on a cliff overlooking black waters, a Gothic masterpiece of stone and shadow with towers that pierced the night sky and windows glowing with crimson light. As we pulled up to the entrance, my confidence crumbled. There were dozens of vampires outside in elaborate gowns and tailored suits, moving with that eerie grace only immortals have, their laughter sharp and musical, their eyes glittering in darkness. And then there was me, human, mortal, breakable. Calum sensed my fear and placed his hand on mine, telling me no one would touch me. I nodded, though my throat was too tight to speak. We stepped out of the car, and the world went silent. Every single vampire turned to look at me. The whispers started immediately. Questions about whether I was human, what I was doing there, if Calum had brought a pet. That word hit me like a physical blow. I wanted to run, but Calum's hand was on my back, gently guiding me forward. He told me to ignore them, but how could I? Their eyes burned into me, dissecting every breath I took. We entered the mansion, and the ballroom was overwhelming. Vaulted ceilings painted with murals of ancient battles, blood-red chandeliers casting everything in crimson glow, at least 100 vampires inside, radiating power and danger, and I was the only human. Before I could say anything to Calum, a voice rang out across the ballroom, silencing everyone. Lady Vereen descended the grand staircase. She was stunning, pale skin that seemed to glow, hair like spun silver, eyes the color of ice. She wore a gown that looked made from shadows and starlight, and when she walked, the room itself seemed to bend to her presence. This was the leader of the High Nocturnal Court. My stomach dropped. Calum bowed slightly, the first time I'd ever seen him show deference to anyone. Vereen approached with a smile that made me think of knives and cold steel. She commented on Calum bringing a guest, the word dripping with mockery. She circled me slowly like a predator sizing up prey, asking if he'd brought a human toy to their most sacred gathering. The room erupted in laughter, cruel, mocking laughter that echoed off the walls and drilled into my skull. I looked at Calum, silently begging him to defend me. But he stood there, silent, his face an unreadable mask. And in that moment, I realized the truth. I wasn't his equal. I was his mistake. Vereen turned back to the crowd, suggesting they make the most of the entertainment Calum had brought. My blood ran cold. She snapped her fingers, and 2 vampires grabbed my arms with iron grips. I tried to pull away but couldn't move them. I called out to Calum desperately, but he didn't move. He just stood there, watching, his expression blank. Vereen laughed, commenting on how well-trained I was, calling for him like a loyal dog. The vampires holding me joined the laughter, and I felt tears burning in my eyes, but I refused to cry. My body was shaking. Vereen leaned in close, her breath cold against my ear. She told me the most amusing thing about humans was that we actually think we matter, that our fleeting little lives have meaning, that they see us as anything more than temporary amusement. She straightened and addressed the room, explaining that humans are fragile, easily broken, and entirely replaceable. The only reason they tolerate our existence is for food, labor, and occasionally as a reminder of how far even the strongest vampire can fall. She looked at Calum with mock pity. The words cut deeper than any blade, because she was right. I didn't belong there. I was just Calum's charity case, his way of proving he was different, and now I had become his greatest embarrassment. I looked at him one more time, searching for any sign that I meant something to him, but all I saw was a stranger. Finally, he spoke, his voice flat, telling them to let me go. Vereen questioned whether he was ready to defend his pet. He repeated that I was his guest and they'd made their point, but she wasn't finished. She explained that from where she stood, the only point being made was that he'd grown weak. The council had been concerned about him, and tonight he'd confirmed every one of their fears. The room fell silent. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about Calum's reputation, his standing in vampire society, and I was the weapon they were using to destroy him. The vampires released me and I stumbled forward, barely catching myself. My arms ached where they'd gripped me. Calum didn't look at me. He was staring at Vereen, his jaw tight, his hands clenched. He told her quietly that he'd brought me because I deserved to be there. She laughed, saying humans don't deserve anything, that they exist at vampire mercy, and that he'd forgotten this made him a liability. My chest tightened. This was my fault. Everything Calum had worked for. I was destroying it. I apologized, my voice cracking, but no one looked at me. I was invisible again, worse than invisible. I was a stain they wanted to erase. I turned toward the exit, my vision blurring with unshed tears. But then Calum called my name, telling me to wait. I froze. His tone was different, urgent, almost desperate. I turned back slowly, and what I saw made my heart stop. Calum's eyes had changed. They weren't silver anymore. They were completely, utterly black, like staring into an abyss. The room went deathly silent. Every vampire took a step back, their faces shifting to fear. Even Lady Vereen looked shaken. She asked Calum slowly what he was doing, her voice losing its mocking edge. He didn't answer her. He was looking at me, and only me. The air around him seemed to ripple, like reality itself was bending. Shadows gathered at his feet, crawling up his body like living things, and the temperature plummeted. I could see my breath forming, and frost began spreading across the marble floor. Vereen commanded him to stop, saying that using the ancient power was forbidden, and he knew the consequences. But Calum interrupted, his voice layered like multiple voices speaking at once, echoing from somewhere deep and old and terrible. He said they'd hurt me, humiliated me, made me feel small. Vereen snapped that I was small, that I was human, that I was nothing. The shadows around Calum exploded outward, and several vampires were thrown back by the force. The chandeliers shattered, raining crystal and darkness across the ballroom. Then Calum spoke again, his black eyes never leaving mine. He said I was not nothing. The way he said it made my chest ache. There was pain in his voice. Centuries of pain, of loneliness, of pretending to be something he wasn't. Fareen's face twisted with rage, asking if he was destroying himself for a human, if he'd lost his mind. He replied quietly that he'd finally found it. He turned to face the high court, and his voice carried through the entire mansion. He explained that for 300 years, he'd served the court, upheld their laws, fought their battles, and remained silent when he disagreed with their cruelty. He'd been the perfect soldier, the loyal servant, the obedient subject. He paused, and the shadows pulsed. But tonight, he was choosing differently. Fareen's eyes widened as he announced he was invoking the ancient rite of the covenant. The entire room gasped. She whispered that he couldn't, that the ritual hadn't been performed in over 1,000 years, that it was forbidden. But Calum insisted it was his right as a first-blood vampire, that he had the authority to invoke it, and she couldn't stop him. He turned back to me, and slowly, the darkness in his eyes receded, replaced by that familiar storm gray. But there was something different now, something raw and vulnerable. He said he needed to tell me something, that I needed to listen because after tonight, nothing would be the same. My heart was racing. I couldn't speak, couldn't move. He admitted he hadn't brought me there as a friend. My chest tightened. He said he hadn't brought me as a companion or guest or any of the lies he'd been telling himself for 3 years. He explained he'd brought me because, according to their oldest laws, a vampire can only pledge the eternal covenant in the presence of the one they choose to bond with forever. The world stopped. He continued, explaining that the eternal covenant is a blood oath that, once made, cannot be broken. The vampire swears to protect, serve, and defend one person above all others, even above the court, even above their own survival. He took a step toward me, saying it's the highest honor a vampire can give and the greatest risk. I managed to whisper, asking why. Because if that person dies, he explained, the vampire dies with them. Their souls become linked, their fates intertwined forever. He said he'd brought me tonight because he wanted the entire court to witness his choice. I asked what choice, my voice barely audible. He knelt before me, this ancient, powerful being knelt in front of me, a human in front of everyone who had mocked me. He said my full name and announced that he chose me. Tears spilled down my cheeks as he continued. He said he chose me not because I was weak, but because I was the strongest person he'd ever known. Not because I needed protection, but because I deserved it. He chose me because in 300 years of existence, I was the only person who'd ever made him feel alive. He reached up and took my hand, and I felt his fingers trembling. He said he chose me because he loved me. The words hung in the air. Then everything happened at once. Vereen screamed in rage, saying he'd just declared war on the entire court. Other vampires were shouting, some in support, most in opposition. But I couldn't hear them. All I could hear was my own heartbeat and Calum's words echoing in my mind. I told him shakily to stand up, pulling him to his feet. I said he shouldn't kneel to me, shouldn't make me into something I wasn't. He tried to explain what he was offering, but I interrupted. I told him I understood perfectly. He was offering to tie his entire existence to mine, to give up his power, his position, everything he'd built, just to protect me. He confirmed this simply. I said it was insane. He agreed it probably was. I let out a shaky laugh through my tears, pointing out that I was human, that I was going to age, get sick, die, and he'd be stuck watching that happen. He said he knew. I added that the court would never accept this, that they'd try to kill me. He said they'd fail. I asked how he could be so sure. He smiled, really smiled, for the first time all night, and said he was very good at keeping what he loved. My breath caught as he asked if I would accept his covenant, if I would let him bind his soul to mine, knowing all the consequences. I looked around the ballroom at the vampires who hated me, at Vereen whose face was twisted with fury, at the world that had told me I didn't matter. Then I looked back at Calum, at the vampire who had seen me, really seen me. I whispered yes. His eyes widened as I said it louder. I told him I accepted his covenant. The relief that flooded his face was overwhelming. He raised his hand, and a thin blade of shadow materialized. Without hesitation, he drew it across his wrist, and dark blood welled up. He spoke the ritual words, saying that with his blood, he bound himself to me. With his life, he protected me. With his death, he honored me. He held out his bleeding wrist. I knew what I had to do. I took his wrist and pressed my lips to the wound. The taste was strange, cold and metallic, but not unpleasant. And as I drank, I felt something shift inside me, like a door opening in my chest. When I pulled back, Calum took the shadow blade and gently cut my palm. He spoke again, saying that with my blood, he was bound. With my life, he was anchored. With my death, he would follow. He pressed his lips to my hand. The moment his lips touched my blood, the world exploded. Light erupted from where we stood, blinding and brilliant. I felt energy surge through my body, connecting me to Calum in a way I couldn't describe. I could feel his heartbeat synchronized with mine. I could feel his emotions, his relief, his joy, his fear, and I knew, without a doubt, that this connection would last until one of us died. When the light faded, the ballroom was in chaos. Some vampires stared in awe. Others shouted in anger. Vereen looked like she wanted to tear us both apart, but none of that mattered. Calum was looking at me like I was the only thing in the universe. He said softly that it was done, that we were bound. I nodded, unable to find words. He pulled me close, his arms wrapping around me protectively, murmuring that they were going to come for us, that the court would see this as betrayal, that we'd have to leave tonight, that we couldn't stay. I acknowledged all of this. He pointed out I was going to lose everything. I said I knew again, then pulled back to look at him, adding that I wasn't losing him. He smiled, and for the first time since I'd met him, he looked truly happy. He agreed that I wasn't losing him. Never again. Vereen's voice cut through the moment, calling this treason, saying he'd violated every law and would be hunted. Calum turned to face her calmly and told her to hunt him then. Her eyes flashed as she said he was throwing away centuries of respect for a human who would be dead in decades. He agreed simply, adding it was the best decision he'd ever made. The room erupted again, but Calum just took my hand, saying we should go home. And as we walked out of that mansion, past the vampires who hated us, past the world that told us we didn't belong together, I realized something. I wasn't afraid anymore, because I finally understood what it meant to be chosen. Not because I was strong or powerful or immortal, but because I was me, and that was enough. We did leave that night. Calum and I packed what we could and fled the city before the court could organize a response. We've been on the move ever since, staying in different places every few weeks, always one step ahead of the vampires sent to bring us back. The bond between us grew stronger over time. In the beginning, it was overwhelming. Every emotion Calum felt crashed into me like waves, and mine into him. We couldn't control it, couldn't filter it. It was suffocating. I remember breaking down crying about 2 weeks after we started running, telling him I couldn't feel everything all the time. He looked devastated, apologizing for not realizing how intense it would be. I clarified it wasn't his fault, that I'd chosen this, I just hadn't known what I was choosing. He explained that the first vampires who formed bonds wrote about this phase, calling it the drowning. When two souls connect so suddenly and completely, there's an adjustment period where you can't tell where you end and the other person begins. I asked how long it lasted. He said for some, days, for others, months. My heart sank. But then he quickly added there were techniques, ways to build mental barriers without severing the bond. That night, he taught me. He explained I should imagine my consciousness as a house, with the bond being a door connecting my house to his. Right now, that door was wide open, so everything flowed through unchecked. But I could control that door, closing it partially when I needed privacy, or opening it fully when I wanted deeper connection. The bond would remain intact either way. It took practice. A lot of practice. But gradually, I learned to control it. I learned to feel Caleb's presence without being overwhelmed. And the beautiful thing was that Caleb was learning the same thing from me. Now, 3 months later, the bond is no longer drowning. It's beautiful. I can feel Caleb's love for me like a constant warmth in my chest. I know where he is at all times, what he's feeling, whether he's safe, and he can feel the same from me. But we've also learned to give each other space, to have private thoughts, to be individuals who choose to connect. But let me back up for a moment. Because to truly understand what happened that night, you need to know how we got there. You need to know about the weeks leading up to the blood banquet, and the slow realization that I was falling in love with someone who could never love me back, or so I thought. It started 3 weeks before the invitation. We were in the library, like always. It was past midnight, and I was researching vampire political structures for my thesis. He was helping me navigate the deliberately complicated records that the court kept hidden from human scholars. I was pointing at a passage in an ancient text that didn't make sense. Something about vampires forming blood bonds with humans, when Caleb went very still. I looked up and asked what was wrong. He said nothing too quickly, that the text was outdated, that the practice had been banned centuries ago. I asked why. He didn't answer, which was unusual. Caleb always answered my questions, even the uncomfortable ones. When I pressed him, he closed the book carefully and explained that it was considered dangerous. The vampire becomes vulnerable, emotionally compromised. The court doesn't tolerate emotional compromises. There was something in his voice that made my chest tighten. I hesitated, then asked if he'd ever formed a blood bond. His eyes met mine, and for just a second, I saw something raw there, something that looked like longing. He said no quietly, but added that he'd wanted to. The air between us shifted. I should have changed the subject, but I didn't. I asked why he hadn't. He stood up, turning away, his hands gripping the back of his chair. He said because the person he would choose deserved better than the half-life he existed in. My heart was pounding. I suggested maybe he should let them decide what they deserve. He turned back slowly, and the look on his face made me forget how to breathe. He said my name like a prayer, adding that if I knew what he was thinking right now, I told him to tell me. He shook his head, saying he couldn't, because once he said it, he couldn't take it back, and I'd never look at him the same way again. I told him maybe I didn't want to look at him the same way, that maybe I was tired of pretending this was just friendship. The silence that followed was suffocating, and then Caleb did something I'd never seen him do before. He looked afraid. He said I didn't understand what I was asking for, that if he let himself love me the way he wanted to, it wouldn't be safe or simple. His world would try to destroy me just for existing near him. I pointed out that his world already wanted to destroy me, that I was human in a vampire-ruled city, already in danger. He said not like this. I told him to protect me then. He laughed, but it was a broken sound. He asked how by keeping me at arm's length forever. By pretending he didn't feel what he felt. By lying to himself and to me until one of us died. I said no, standing up and crossing to him. I said by being honest, by telling me the truth, by trusting that I was strong enough to handle whatever came next. We were inches apart now. I could feel the cold radiating from his skin, could see the way his eyes had darkened to that stormy gray, that meant he was fighting something internal. He whispered that he wasn't good for me. I told him that wasn't his choice to make. He started to say my name, but I interrupted. I told him I was falling in love with him, that I'd been falling in love with him for months, maybe years. That I was terrified because I knew he was vampire and I was human, and this didn't make sense and probably ended badly, but I didn't care because he kissed me. It wasn't gentle or tentative. It was desperate, like he'd been holding back for so long that the dam had finally broken. His hands cupped my face, and even though his touch was cold, it felt right. It felt like coming home. When we finally pulled apart, we were both shaking. He admitted he'd wanted to do that for 2 years. I asked why he hadn't. He said because he was trying to be noble, trying to protect me from himself. He pulled back slightly, his eyes searching mine, saying he was tired of being noble, tired of pretending he didn't want this, didn't want me. My heart was soaring. I told him not to pretend then. He warned it wouldn't be easy. I said I didn't care. He said the court would. I interrupted, saying I didn't care. He smiled, really smiled. And the sound of his laugh filled something inside me I hadn't realized was empty. He called me incredibly stubborn. I told him he was incredibly dense if he didn't notice that before. After a moment, I asked what happened now. He took my hands in his expression turning serious. He said now he would show me that I mattered, that I wasn't just some human he befriended out of pity or curiosity. He would show his world that I was important, that I deserved respect. I asked how. He said the blood banquet. It was in 3 weeks, and he wanted me there with him. My stomach dropped. I protested that it was insane, that I'd be the only human there. He said he knew. I said they'd hate me. He said probably. I asked why then. He said because he was going to make a choice that night, a choice that would change everything, and he needed me there when he made it. I didn't understand then, didn't realize what he was planning. All I knew was that for the first time in my life, someone was choosing me, and that was enough to say yes. The next 3 weeks were a blur of emotions. Caleb and I saw each other every night, always careful, always discreet. We couldn't risk the court finding out about us before the banquet. If they knew, they'd find a way to stop him from making his choice. He told me bits and pieces about what he was planning, but never the full picture. One night as we sat in my apartment, he explained it was an ancient ritual, older than the court itself. It would bind us together in a way that nothing could break. I asked how it would bind us. He hesitated, saying he'd explain everything at the banquet, that he promised. But he added that once he did this, there was no going back for either of us. I asked if it was dangerous. He said for him, yes, for me, I'd be the most protected human in vampire history. I added that I'd also be the most hated. He agreed. I took a deep breath and said I was still in. He asked why, genuine curiosity in his voice. Why would I risk everything for this, for him? I thought about that question, really thought about it. I told him slowly that because for the first time in my life, someone saw me as more than just prey, more than just human. He saw me, Caleb, the real me, and that was worth any risk. He pulled me into his arms, and we stayed like that for a long time. But as the banquet approached, I couldn't shake the growing sense of dread. What if something went wrong? What if the court rejected us? What if Caleb's plan failed and I ended up being the reason he lost everything? 2 nights before the banquet, I tried to back out. I told him while pacing my apartment that I couldn't do this, that I was going to ruin everything for him, his position, his reputation, his entire life. He interrupted calmly, saying his life was ruined long before he met me. He was just existing, Ilara, going through the motions, playing the role they expected of him. I protested that he was safe then. He said he was empty. He stood up and took my hands, forcing me to stop pacing and look at him. He asked me quietly if I knew what it was like to live for 3 centuries and never feel alive. To watch the world change around you while you stay the same, frozen, unchanging, untouchable. I shook my head. He said it was torture, that he'd thought that was just how existence worked for vampires. They're not supposed to feel, not supposed to connect. They're predators, observers, eternal but never truly living. His eyes met mine, and they were filled with an emotion I'd never seen there before. He said that then he met me, and suddenly, he understood what he'd been missing. I made him feel human again, feel anything again. Tears burned in my eyes. He said firmly that no, I wasn't ruining his life. I was giving him one, and he wasn't letting that go without a fight. The conviction in his voice shattered my remaining doubts. We were doing this. Whatever happened, we were doing this together. But let me tell you about what running really means. Because it's not just about physically moving from place to place. It's about the constant state of alertness, the way you can never truly relax, the exhaustion that seeps into your bones. The first safe house was a cabin in the mountains. Beautiful, isolated, perfect for hiding, but also lonely, terrifyingly lonely. Every night, I'd lie awake listening to the sounds of the forest, wondering if that crack of a branch was just an animal or a vampire scout. Kylam would stand by the window for hours, watching, waiting. Through our bond, I could feel his vigilance, his determination to keep me safe. But I could also feel the toll it was taking on him. He wasn't sleeping, not that vampires need much sleep, but he wasn't resting at all. On the third night, I finally confronted him about it. I told him he needed to rest, that he couldn't protect me if he was exhausted. He turned to me and said simply that they were coming. The court doesn't forgive treason, especially not this kind. I said it was because he chose me. He corrected me, saying it was because he chose himself. I was just the catalyst that finally made him strong enough to break free. Through our bond, I could feel his determination, but I could also feel his concern, his worry, his fear, not for himself, but for me. I pointed out that he was worried about me. He smiled slightly, commenting that the bond makes it hard to hide emotions. I told him to tell me what he was thinking. He came to sit beside me on the couch where I'd curled up with a blanket. He said he was thinking that he'd dragged me into a war I never asked for, that I deserved better than running and hiding. I reminded him I chose this. He said I chose him, and there was a difference. I took his cold hand in mine and told him I knew what I was signing up for. Maybe not all the details, but I knew it would be dangerous. I knew the court would retaliate. He pointed out that knowing intellectually and living through it are very different things. I told him we'd figure it out together. He pulled me close, and I felt his relief through the bond, mixed with love so strong it made my chest ache. He murmured that I was incredible, asking if I knew that. I joked that he might have mentioned it once or twice. He laughed, and the sound filled the small cabin with warmth, but the peace didn't last long. On day 5, they found us. I woke to Calum standing by the window, his entire body tense. I asked what it was, already knowing the answer. He said scouts, 3 of them, probably sent to confirm our location before the main force arrived. Fear shot through me. I asked what we would do. He said we run. We packed in under 10 minutes, just the essentials. Calum had go bags ready, which told me he'd been expecting this. We were out the back door before the scouts reached the cabin. I watched from the tree line as they broke down the front door, their movements precise and coordinated. Calum said quietly that they weren't there to negotiate. I asked how he knew. He explained they'd brought silver chains and fire starters. They were there to capture and kill. My blood ran cold. We moved deeper into the forest. After an hour of hiking, exhaustion set in. Unlike Calum, I needed sleep, food, rest. I admitted I was slowing him down. He said no, I wasn't. I protested, but he stopped walking and turned to face me, his expression intense. He said we were bound, that my limitations were his now. He needed to account for them, protect me through them, work with them. I said that was exactly what I meant. Without me, he interrupted, saying without me, he'd be dead inside, emotionally, if not physically. So yes, we needed to stop for me to rest. Yes, we needed to find food and water. Yes, I slowed us down compared to if he were alone. He cupped my face in his hands, saying he didn't want to be alone. He didn't want to run forever without purpose. I wasn't a burden. I was the reason he was running, the reason he was fighting, the reason he was alive. Tears burned in my eyes. I told him I loved him. He said he loved me too, then told me there was another safe house about 10 miles north where we could rest. We made it to the second safe house by dawn. This one was different. An abandoned church with reinforced walls and blackout curtains. Calum had clearly prepared for exactly this kind of situation. I asked how many of these he had as we secured the doors. He said 12, scattered across different regions, each one stocked with supplies and escape routes. I commented that he'd been planning this for a long time. He corrected me, saying he'd been hoping for a reason to use them for a long time. We stayed at the church for 2 weeks. During that time, I learned more about the bond between us. It wasn't just emotions I could feel. Sometimes, late at night, I'd catch flashes of Caleb's memories. Ancient battles, conversations with vampires long dead, moments from his 3 centuries that shaped who he became, and he could feel mine too. One night, I woke to find him sitting beside me, his expression sad. He said softly that he'd seen my childhood, the way the vampires treated my family, the way they made me feel small. I sat up, wrapping the blanket around myself, saying it wasn't all bad. He said he'd seen them spit at my father for not bowing fast enough, seen them laugh when my mother dropped groceries trying to step out of their way. I said that's just how it was. He interrupted, anger flashing in his eyes, saying it shouldn't have been. I'd been taught to accept cruelty as normal, to minimize my own humanity because it made me vulnerable. I looked away, asking what else I was supposed to do. He said fight, resist, demand better. I pointed out that was easy for him to say. He was a vampire. He had power. He took my hand and said now I had power too, through him, through our bond. No vampire could touch me without going through him first. The weight of that statement settled over us. I asked quietly if that was why he did this, the covenant, to give me power. He said no immediately. He did it because he loved me. The power was just a bonus. I laughed despite myself, saying it was a bonus that had gotten us hunted by the entire court. He said it was worth it. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Then I asked if I could ask him something. He said anything. I asked why he didn't use the ancient power before. If he'd had it all along, why wait until that night? He was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he said because the ancient power comes with a cost. It's not just raw strength. It's accessing the original vampire bloodline, the power. The first vampires wielded before the court domesticated them. I questioned the word domesticated. He explained that they made vampires civilized, controlled. The court's entire structure is built on limiting vampire power, making them follow rules, work together within hierarchy. He looked at his hands, saying the ancient power rejects all of that. It's wild, primal, dangerous. And once you use it, the court sees you as a threat. They can't control you anymore. So he knew using it would make him an outcast, I said. He confirmed yes, but he did it anyway, I added. He met my eyes, saying I needed him to, and he was tired of playing by their rules. My chest tightened. I started to apologize for making him, but he interrupted gently. He told me not to apologize for existing, for mattering to him, for being the catalyst that finally set him free. He pulled me into his arms, murmuring that he spent 300 years being what they wanted him to be, and in 3 years with me, he finally became who he was meant to be. I held him tighter, whispering that we were going to survive this. He agreed. But even through our bond, I could feel his uncertainty, because we both knew the truth. The court wouldn't stop hunting us. They couldn't afford to. If other vampires saw what Caleb had done, choosing love over power, humanity over immortality, freedom over control, it would inspire revolution. And the court's greatest fear was losing their grip on vampire society, so they would come for us with everything they had, and we would have to be ready. The attack came on day 18. We were at the 4th safe house, a warehouse near the coast, when Caleb suddenly tensed, saying they were there. I felt it too through the bond, the presence of multiple vampires closing in. I asked how many, trying to keep my voice steady. He said 7, 3 scouts, 4 enforcers. They were taking this seriously. He moved to the weapons cache he'd hidden in the wall. Fear flooded through me, and Caleb paused, turning to face me. He said softly that he wouldn't let them touch me. I told him I knew. He asked if I did, because he could feel my fear, and he needed me to trust him. I took a breath, saying I trusted him. I was just scared of what he might have to do to protect me. Understanding flashed across his face. He crossed to me, taking my hands. He said he'd killed before, long before he met me. This wouldn't be the first time he'd taken a life to protect something he loved. I pointed out that it was different now. He wasn't just defending himself. He was defending me. And if anyone died because of me, he corrected me firmly, saying they'd die because they chose to attack us. I didn't carry that guilt. He did. Before I could respond, the warehouse door exploded inward. 7 vampires entered, led by a woman with white hair and silver eyes. She announced coldly that Calum Draven was hereby charged with treason against the High Court, telling him to surrender the human and come peacefully. Calum stepped in front of me, shadows already gathering at his feet. He said no. The woman's eyes narrowed, saying they couldn't let me live. I'd seen too much, knew too much. I was a liability to their entire society. Calum said I was his, and the ancient power flickered in his eyes, adding that he protected what was his. She said then he'd die protecting me. What happened next was brutal. The enforcers attacked simultaneously, moving with supernatural speed and coordinated precision. But Calum was faster. The ancient power erupted from him like a storm, shadows becoming solid weapons that tore through vampires. One enforcer went down immediately, his chest pierced by a spear of solid darkness. 2 more were thrown back by waves of force, crashing through walls. But the woman with white hair was stronger. She met Calum head-on, her own power flaring. Silver fire that burned even vampire flesh. They fought like gods, inhuman speed, impossible strength, powers that defied physics, and I could only watch, helpless, as Calum risked everything to keep them away from me. Through our bond, I felt every blow he took, every moment of pain, every second of desperation. He was strong, incredibly strong, but there were 7 of them. One of the enforcers broke away from the main fight, heading straight for me. I scrambled back, but vampire speed meant he crossed the warehouse in a heartbeat. His hand closed around my throat, lifting me off the ground. He hissed that this could have been easy, but I had to make it complicated. I couldn't breathe, couldn't scream. And then Calum was there. The ancient power exploded with such force that it shattered every window in the warehouse. The enforcer holding me disintegrated, literally turned to ash in an instant. I fell to the ground, gasping, and Calum caught me. His voice echoed with inhuman rage as he said the vampire had touched me, had put his hands on me. The remaining vampires backed away, genuine fear on their faces. The woman with white hair raised her hands, starting to say this didn't have to. But Calum interrupted. He said they'd come to kill me, to take me from him. There was no mercy for that. What happened next, I won't describe in detail. Let's just say that by the time Calum finished, there were no survivors. When it was over, he collapsed next to me, the ancient power fading, leaving him drained and shaking. He asked if I was okay, his hands gentle as he checked my throat where the vampire had grabbed me. I nodded, unable to speak. He murmured that he was sorry I had to see that, sorry he couldn't prevent them from getting to me. I managed to croak out that he'd saved me, that he'd saved us both. He pulled me into his arms, and I felt his relief crash over me like a wave, but I also felt his exhaustion. Using that much power had cost him. He said after a moment that we needed to move. The court would send more. They always sent more. I helped him stand, and together, we stumbled out of the warehouse and into the night. Behind us, the building burned, evidence of the battle destroyed, the bodies reduced to ash, and ahead of us, an uncertain future, but we had each other, and sometimes, that's enough. People think romance is grand gestures, the covenant ritual, the dramatic escape, the epic battles, and sure, those moments matter. But you know what I remember most from these 3 months? The small moments. Like the night Calum taught me to dance in a cabin in the mountains with a creaky wooden floor. There was no music, just the sound of rain on the roof. He said we should dance anyway and started humming some melody from centuries ago. It was beautiful. We danced in that empty cabin for hours. Or the morning I woke up to find he'd gone into town and bought fresh bread, cheese, and fruit for my breakfast. He arranged everything with surprising care, explaining. He knew he couldn't eat it but wanted me to have something good, something normal. I cried happy tears. Or the time I got sick with just a regular cold. Calum panicked. He wrapped me in every blanket, made me soup, and stayed by my side for 3 days straight. I told him he was being ridiculous, that it was just a cold. But he insisted I was fragile and he had to protect me from everything, including microscopic invaders. I laughed so hard I started coughing. Through the bond, I could feel his genuine fear, because he'd tied his life to mine, and even though a cold wouldn't kill me, he couldn't help but see every threat to my health as a potential threat to our bond. But there were other moments too. Moments that showed me we were building a real life together, not just surviving. Like the evening we found an old farmhouse with a dusty record player in the attic, along with a collection of jazz records from the 1950s. We spent the entire evening dancing to crackling music, completely forgetting for a few hours that we were fugitives. Or the morning I woke to find he'd somehow managed to find fresh wildflowers and had arranged them in a chipped vase on the windowsill. When I asked where he got them, he just smiled and said he'd gone for a walk. Through our bond, I felt his contentment at seeing my reaction, or the rainy afternoon when I taught him how to play poker. He'd lived for 3 centuries but had never learned because the court considered gambling beneath them. He was terrible at it. His vampire instincts made him too cautious, too calculated. I won every single hand, and his frustrated expression made me laugh so hard I cried. These small moments matter more than any grand gesture, because they show the reality of love, not just the dramatic parts, but the quiet, everyday parts, the choosing each other over and over again in small ways. But adjusting to this new life hasn't been easy for either of us. Calum spent 300 years as part of vampire high society. He was accustomed to luxury, to respect, to having his commands obeyed without question. Now he's living in abandoned buildings, constantly moving, always looking over his shoulder. I've seen him struggle with it. Not because he misses the luxury itself, but because it represents how much his world has changed, how much he's given up. One night, about 6 weeks after we left the city, I found him sitting outside one of the safe houses, staring up at the stars. I sat beside him, and for a while, we didn't speak. Finally, he admitted that sometimes he wondered if he'd made the right choice. Not about loving me, never about that. But about invoking the covenant, about tying his fate to mine, about forcing me into this life of constant danger. Through our bond, I could feel his guilt, his fear that he'd been selfish, that he'd put his own desires above my safety and happiness. I told him he hadn't forced me into anything. I'd made my choice with full knowledge of the consequences, and if I had to make that choice again, I'd make it the same way. He asked how I could be so sure. I took his hand and pointed out that 3 months ago, I was working at a library, going through the motions of a life that felt empty. I was surviving, not living, just like he had been for centuries. But now I was truly alive. Yes, I was scared sometimes. Yes, I missed having a home, a routine, a sense of security, but I was experiencing things I never imagined. I was connected to someone in a way most people never get to experience. I was learning what it meant to be brave, to fight for what I loved, to choose joy even in the midst of danger. He pulled me close then, and I felt the weight of his guilt lift slightly. He said softly that he didn't deserve me. I told him that was probably true, but he was stuck with me anyway. He laughed, that genuine, surprised laugh that I'd learned to treasure. Everything changed when Lyra found us. After she left, Calum and I spent hours discussing what she'd told us, that we'd inspired others, that the court was fracturing, that our choice had sent ripples through vampire society. It was overwhelming and terrifying, because it meant our story was bigger than just us. It meant we had a responsibility, whether we wanted it or not. Caleb asked me what I thought we should do. I told him honestly that I didn't know. We'd never set out to start a revolution. We'd just wanted to be together. He pointed out that sometimes the most powerful movements start with one simple act of defiance. That throughout history, change has often come from individuals who refuse to accept the status quo, even when it costs them everything. I asked if he thought we should reach out to the others, the vampires who'd left the court. He said maybe, but carefully. The court was still hunting us. If we started organizing, we'd become an even bigger target. But then he added something that changed everything. He said that maybe that was okay. Maybe being a target was worth it, if it meant creating a world where other vampires could make the same choice we did. I told him if we were going to do this, we needed to be smart about it. We couldn't lead a revolution while constantly running for our lives. We needed to establish ourselves somewhere safe, somewhere we could coordinate with others, somewhere we could build something lasting. Through our bond, I felt his gratitude, his love, his certainty that we could do this together. That night, we made a plan. We would use the list Lyra had given us. We would reach out carefully to the other vampires who'd left the court. We would find a permanent safe house. And we would start building a network. Not an army, but a community of vampires who wanted something different. It was ambitious, probably impossible, definitely dangerous. But for the first time since leaving the blood banquet, we weren't just running, we were moving toward something. But there was one question I hadn't wanted to face. What happens when I get old? Caleb will stay exactly as he is, but I'll age. 20 years from now, I'll look middle-aged while he looks young. 40 years from now, I'll be elderly while he's still young. And then I'll die, and he'll die with me. We talked about it recently. I was looking at myself in the mirror and noticed a few gray hairs. It shouldn't have bothered me, but it felt like a reminder, a countdown. Caleb appeared behind me, his reflection joining mine. He said I was beautiful. I pointed out I was going gray while he would never go gray, never get wrinkles, never get old. There was silence before he asked if that bothered me. I turned and asked if it bothered him that he was bound to someone who was going to age while he didn't. He said no immediately, explaining that every gray hair, every wrinkle would be proof that he got to grow old with me, that it was a gift, not a curse. I whispered that I was going to die in maybe 50 years, and he would die with me. He was giving up centuries for decades with me. He said yes simply, adding he'd make that trade 1,000 times over. I asked how he could be so sure. He cupped my face and explained he knew what those centuries would be like without me. Empty, meaningless, just existing without living. His eyes met mine as he said he'd rather have 50 years of truly living with me than 500 years of merely existing alone. Tears burned in my eyes. We stood there holding each other for a long time, and I realized I'd been so focused on what Caleb was giving up that I'd missed what he was gaining. A life, a real, genuine, beautiful life with love and laughter and small moments and even the sad, scary parts, all of it. Everything that makes existence meaningful. Yes, it would end, but everything ends. The question isn't how long something lasts. The question is what you do with the time you have, and we were choosing to live every moment fully, to love without restraint, to make our limited time together count. That conversation shifted something in me. I stopped seeing our bond as a sentence, a countdown to when I would die and take Caleb with me. Instead, I started seeing it as a gift. We had decades together. Decades to build a life, to make memories, to change the world around us. And honestly, that's more than most people get. Most people go through their entire lives without ever experiencing a connection like ours. They love, yes, but they never feel another person's emotions, never share thoughts, never have that absolute certainty that comes from a bond that connects souls. Caleb and I have that, and I'm grateful for it, even knowing how it will end. Over the weeks following Lyra's visit, we made contact with more vampires from the list. Each conversation was cautious, carefully coded in case the court was monitoring. But gradually, We started to build trust. Marcus was the first, a vampire who'd been part of the court's enforcement division for over a century. He'd left 2 days after hearing about what happened at the blood banquet. When we finally met him in person, he told us he'd been waiting for someone to make a move like ours for decades. He was tired of enforcing rules he didn't believe in, tired of punishing vampires for feeling emotions. Then there was Celeste, a young vampire barely 50 years old. She'd been turned against her will and had never accepted the court's teachings about human inferiority. She'd been maintaining secret friendships with humans for years, always careful to hide it. When she heard about the Covenant, she'd seen it as validation that her feelings weren't wrong. The most surprising was Theron, an ancient vampire older even than Calum. He'd been part of the original council that formed the court over 2,000 years ago. And he told us something that shocked us both. The court had started with good intentions. It was meant to protect vampires from humans who hunted them, to create structure and safety. But over time, it had become corrupt. It had transformed from a protective body into a controlling regime. Theron had watched it happen slowly, over centuries, had protested at first, but eventually fell silent, believing change was impossible, until he heard about us. These conversations changed everything for me. I'd thought our story was simple, a vampire and a human falling in love, but it was so much bigger. It was about freedom, about choice, about refusing to let fear and control dictate how we lived. We weren't just running from the court, we were the first brick in a new foundation. Every conversation we had, every vampire we inspired, every connection we made, it was all building towards something that could fundamentally change vampire society. But revolution isn't without cost. 2 months after we started building our network, the court struck back, but not at us directly. They were smarter than that. They went after Marcus. They tracked him to his safe house and sent a full enforcement squad. When we got word of the attack, it was already over. Marcus fought valiantly, took down 3 enforcers before they overwhelmed him. They didn't kill him. That would have made him a martyr. Instead, they captured him and brought him back to the court for a public trial. The message was clear. This is what happens to those who betray us. When Calum heard the news, I felt his rage through our bond like a physical thing. He wanted to go after Marcus, to rescue him, to make the court pay. But I stopped him. I reminded him that Marcus knew the risks. We all did. And if Calum went charging into court territory, he'd be captured or killed, and everything we'd been building would fall apart. It was the hardest conversation we'd ever had, because I was asking him to let a friend suffer to protect a cause. To choose the bigger picture over immediate action. Every instinct he had was screaming at him to fight. But he listened, because he trusted me, and because he knew I was right. Instead of a rescue attempt, we did something smarter. We spread word of what had happened. We made sure every vampire in our growing network knew about Marcus's sacrifice, about his bravery, about how the court was so threatened by our movement that they had to resort to public displays of power. And it worked. Marcus's capture didn't scare people away from our cause. It rallied them. Within a week, 5 more vampires left the court. Within 2 weeks, 10 more. The court's show of strength had backfired, revealing their weakness instead. Marcus became our first martyr. And martyrs, as history has shown, are powerful symbols. Through our bond, I felt Calum's grief for Marcus mixed with grim satisfaction. We were winning, slowly, painfully, at great cost. But we were winning. Late one night, as we lay together in our current safe house, I asked Calum a question I'd been avoiding. What happened when we won? If we actually managed to change vampire society, to create a world where love was accepted and boundaries could be crossed, what then? He was quiet for a long moment. Then he admitted he didn't know. He'd spent so long fighting against the court that he hadn't really thought about what would come after. I pointed out that we needed to think about it, because building a revolution was one thing, but building a new society, that was something else entirely. We spent hours that night talking about possibilities, about how vampire-human relationships might work in a world that accepted them, about what protections humans would need, about how to prevent the new system from becoming as corrupt as the old one. It was exciting and terrifying in equal measure. Because we were essentially trying to redesign millennia of vampire culture based on our own relationship. What if we got it wrong? What if our vision wasn't what others needed? But Calum reminded me of something important. We didn't have to have all the answers. We just had to start the conversation. Other vampires, other humans, would bring their own perspectives, their own ideas. Together, we'd figure it out. That conversation marked a shift in how I saw our mission. We weren't trying to impose our views on everyone. We were trying to create space for different views to exist, to make it okay for vampires to choose love if they wanted to make it okay for humans to be seen as equals if they chose to engage with vampire society. Choice. That's what it all came down to. The court had tried to eliminate choice, to control every aspect of vampire existence, and we were fighting to give it back. 3 days ago, something happened that changed everything. We were at our current safe house when Calum suddenly went rigid, saying someone was there. My heart raced as I asked if it was the court. He said he didn't know, that the presence felt different. We heard a knock at the door, a knock, not a forced entry, not an attack, a polite knock. Calum told me to stay behind him and move to the door. When he opened it, there was a young vampire standing there. She had dark hair pulled back in a ponytail and wore regular clothes, not the formal attire most court vampires preferred. She immediately said she wasn't there to fight, that she just wanted to talk. Calum asked who sent her. She said no one, that she'd come on her own. He asked why. She took a breath and explained that she'd seen what he did at the blood banquet, and she thought he was brave. The word hung in the air. Brave, not traitorous, not foolish, brave. Calum studied her for a long moment, then stepped aside and told her to come in. She entered cautiously, her eyes finding me. She said my name, and there was no contempt in her voice, just curiosity. I confirmed I was Alara and asked who she was. She introduced herself as Lyra, explaining she'd been part of the court's junior council, but after what happened at the banquet, she couldn't stay. Calum tensed, asking if she'd left the court. She confirmed she had, 3 weeks ago, and added she wasn't the only one. My eyes widened. She sat down and explained that what we'd done had resonated with people, younger vampires mostly, those who'd been questioning the court's rigid structure. Calum asked how many had left. She said 12 left after the banquet, with more considering it. I couldn't believe it. She corrected me, saying it wasn't just because of us, but because of what we represented, the possibility that they didn't have to live the way the court told them to. She looked at Calum and pointed out he was one of the oldest vampires who'd upheld their laws for centuries, and he'd walked away for love. That sent shockwaves through their community. Calum asked what she wanted from us. She pulled out a folded paper, saying she wasn't there to ask us to lead a rebellion. She just wanted us to know we weren't alone, that there were others who believed what we did was right. She handed the paper to Calum, explaining it was a list of safe contacts, vampires who'd left the court or sympathized with our choice. If we ever needed help, they were there. I felt tears pricking my eyes. We weren't alone. All this time, I'd thought we were fighting with just the two of us, but we weren't. There were others. I asked why she was helping us. She smiled and said because we'd helped her. She'd been pretending to be emotionless for 60 years because that's what the court demanded. And then she saw me, a human, stand in front of the entire court and choose love over fear. That took more courage than she'd ever had. She stood up saying she should go, but she wanted us to know we mattered, that what we were doing mattered. Before she left, she turned back and said the court was fracturing, slowly, subtly, but it was happening. In a few decades, maybe centuries, she thought vampire society might be completely different. I asked if that was because of us. She corrected me again, saying it was because of us, that we'd shown them a different way to exist. After she left, Calum and I sat in silence for a long time. I finally said we'd inspired people. He agreed. I said it was insane. He laughed, pointing out we'd passed insane a while ago. I leaned against him and asked if he thought she was right. He said maybe. That change is slow, But yes, he thought we might have started something. I said I hadn't meant to start a revolution. He replied that the best revolutions are never planned, that they start with one person making a brave choice, and then another person seeing that and finding the courage to make their own. I asked what we did now. He looked at the list and said, "Now we keep living, keep loving, keep being proof that another way is possible." He smiled at me, adding that maybe we'd help others find their own courage along the way. My name is Alara Voss. I'm human in a world ruled by vampires. I'm bonded to a vampire who chose love over eternity, and I'm hunted by a court that sees me as a threat to their control. But I'm also something else now. I'm a symbol, not because I wanted to be, but because I made a choice that others saw and found inspiration in. And that's the thing about love. Real love. The kind that crosses boundaries and defies conventions. That kind of love ripples outward. It touches people you've never met, inspires changes you'll never see, creates possibilities you never imagined. Caleb and I didn't set out to start a revolution. We just wanted to be together. But in fighting for that right, we showed others that it was possible to fight for what they wanted too. And maybe that's what the court feared most. Not that one vampire would bond with one human, but that others would see it and think, why not them too? That's the power of example. That's the danger of hope. That's the revolution of love. We have no idea what the future holds. The court might find us tomorrow. More vampires might leave, inspired by our story. Or maybe nothing will change, and we'll just be two fugitives finding happiness in the margins. But whatever happens, we'll face it together, with our bond connecting us, with our love sustaining us, with our story rippling outward in ways we can't predict or control. I should have never gone to the blood banquet, but I'm so damn glad I did. Because that night, I stopped being invisible. That night, I became someone's entire world. That night, I learned that the most dangerous thing you can do is also the most necessary thing. Be brave enough to be loved and to love in return. Completely, irrevocably, forever. This is my story, but it's also our story, and it's only just beginning.